Welcome. Now, the long-standing tension between Israel and Iran has exploded into one of the most dangerous conflicts in the Middle East in recent history. And despite the ceasefire, the whole world is buzzing with anticipation, at what would happen next, looking at the implications of what this war could cause in the world. And so we're going to be looking at the Iran-Israeli-US crisis and the implications on global economy and peace. And joining us via Zoom this morning is Professor Chinyere Egbe. He is a scholar, an international affairs expert. He's also an economist and a professor at the University of Mayors in Coney. Good morning, Professor Egbe. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning. I am a professor at Medgar College of the City University of New York. That's why you call CUNY. I'm very glad to be here with you. And so, what are the issues that we want to discuss now?
All right, now we want to start from the beginning. Now, we know that Iran and Israel used to be friendly and had a very good diplomatic relationship, at least before 1979. So now, why did Israel, start seeing, or rather, why did Iran start seeing Israel as an enemy after 1979? And how did their relationship degenerate, to what it is now at the moment?
Okay, first of all, I can attribute it to ideological differences, and because when you say since up to 1979, yes, up to 1979, Iran was ruled by, or you can say governed by, the monarchy of Reza Pahlavi, the Shah Reza Pahlavi. And the monarchy was more or less a conservative monarchy that was more inclined to be friends with the West, with the Western world, that is Western Europe, United States. So in that way, they were friendly with Israel on that basis. Reza Pahlavi was more the kind of, I would say, aristocratic uh, uh, person that was more inclined to be with the West. And so what happened then was in 1979, the Shah was overthrown by an Islamic group and the Islamic clerics who now take over Iran. Now, the Islamic world has never been happy with the creation of the State of Israel. And so the difference here is just that the Islamic world will not tolerate Israel. Meanwhile, given that the Islamic world has never been happy with Israel, organizations, such as radical Muslim organizations like Hezbollah and whoever else, were not inclined to begin to attack Israel. And so that's simply the explanation. It's just ideological and attitudes. Now remember that all those centuries, Iran is not an Arabic country, and the Iranians are not Arabs. And so, depending on who is at the helm of affairs, the attitude towards Israel will be different.
All right. Now, looking at um, the U.S. and their involvement in this war, starting from their direct attacks at Iran and then calling for the ceasefire. So, how would you address, or what would you say about the U.S. involvement in all of this?
Well, again, since the Islamic Revolution in Iran, I call it Islamic Revolution because this is what they call it. The U.S. Has again not been very good friends with Iran, and the Iranians, attributed all their problems, their economic problems, and their political instabilities to Western intervention. And of course, the U.S. is considered a Western country. As you may realize, in 1979, some Iranians held Americans hostage, and it took a military intervention to release them. Even though the military intervention was not successful, but eventually led to a release. And once more, the whole idea is just that the Arab world or the Islamic world in the Middle East, so to speak, generally, have always felt that the Europeans were exploiting them. And so there is this radicalism against anything that has its foundations in Western Europe. And this is what it is. And that attitude has been there, I would say, since at least the end of the Bronze Age. It's about 3,000 years ago. So it's not a new thing, and this is what is happening.
All right, and before this direct attacks, I mean, this entire time, Iran and Israel have been attacking each other, through proxy wars. So why would you say Israel and Iran have avoided an open war like this for so long and instead made use of proxies?
Well, you realize that given the hostile attitude of this Islamic government in Iran, they've been developing nuclear weapons. And the superpowers seem to feel like they should have a monopoly of nuclear weapons for their own reasons. And one particular reason is that they feel that they are more reasonable in the way they use weaponry. And that if you allowed these Islamic countries, Iran is developing nuclear enriched uranium, which could lead to development of nuclear weapons. Pakistan is doing the same thing, but Pakistan is not as hostile to the Western world as Iran. Nevertheless, what I think prompted the U.S. to attack Iran was simply that the U.S. has always protected Israel. The Western world has always protected Israel since the formation of the Jewish state in Israel. And so the U.S. intervention in Iran was simply designed to limit or, if possible, to totally destroy the nuclear capabilities of Iran. And if Iran was allowed to develop nuclear weapons, what could happen next? And they might use it because the U.S. and the Western world believe that the Iranians are not rational in their use of weapons, and they would just use it anyhow. And this is what I see that's going on.
All right, now speaking of nuclear weapons, we know that Israel also has, these nuclear capabilities as well as some of the other world powers. So why is the worry so much on Iran having nuclear power?
Well, because they think that Iranians are going to be irrational in the use of nuclear power. I mean, I don't think that anybody that eventually uses nuclear power is irrational, but they feel that the Iranians are a lot more volatile, or the Western, I'm sorry, the Islamic states are much more volatile, and they are more likely to not to use nuclear weapons irrationally. Because after all, since the Second World War, when the Western world saw the potential devastating effect of a nuclear the use of nuclear weapons, they feel they're more reasonable about it. I don't know what is reasonable about them. And the question is, why are you developing these weapons that can destroy the world 10 times over? And you're not using it. You know that if you use it, you're going to destroy everybody, including yourself. Nevertheless, they feel more comfortable for them to accumulate it and engage in pugnacious banter against each other, but hopefully they will not use it. I don't know what will cause anybody to use it. Nevertheless, they want to hold on to it. They feel that they're more reasonable about it, and this is just their perspective. I don't know if it is so, but that is their perspective.
All right, and now, as it stands now, Iran is already, threatening to leave the NPT and also the IEAE. So, what do you think will happen if Iran, makes good of that threat?
What is NPT and what is IEAE?
NPT, the International Nuclear Treaty, and the
Okay.
International Atomic Energy Agency.
Okay. Fine. They are threatening to leave. And so if they leave, what would simply happen is that they will not commit themselves to abide by any restraints in the use of nuclear weapons or even in the development of nuclear weapons. Uh, in those treaties, what has happened is that countries like Iran and any other countries that are beginning to develop nuclear capabilities essentially have made a promise that they will not develop nuclear capabilities for other than peaceful purposes, that is, for generating energy, peaceful energy, energy for production, and they will not develop nuclear capabilities to make weapons. If they withdraw, then they will not participate in any negotiations. They will not abide by any agreement not to develop nuclear weapons. But if they do, I can assure you that what's going to happen is that the Western world will not uh, also be obligated to respect their own national, the national or sovereign rights of Iran. I can assure you of that in terms of policy making. Now they will go out of their way to destroy those facilities that may enable countries like Iran to develop nuclear weapons. But how about North Korea, which is communist, which is aligned with Russia? There's potential there for some very dangerous outcomes.
Okay, and also one of the threats Iran is also making is to block the Strait where much of the world's oil passes. Now, what would that mean for, the global oil supply if they go through with that?
Okay, I was coming to that. That is the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz, about 25% of world oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz because countries like Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, their oil trade passes through the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran may be able to Iran may claim sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. But that means they would have to defend it militarily, because really in international law, there's only so much of the Strait of Hormuz that Iran can actually legally restrict access to. But if they do so, they're going to create problems. Now that is military problems. But besides that, the main issue when you block the Strait of Hormuz is that, of course, it's going to have an economic impact. One of which is that uh, we would have to develop alternative sources of oil. The oil trade would have to pass through alternative routes. You might not begin to develop pipelines from Kuwait through Oman and Arabia so as to avoid the Strait of Hormuz, which is going to take a long time. In the interim, what is going to happen is that insurance premiums will rise, the cost of shipping will rise, and that will create quite a bit of economic disruption around the world. I mean, supply chains will be disrupted, and so again, that will also cause shortages and the requirement to develop alternative ways of transporting oil.
And do you think this could affect, investor trust in the Middle East if, these things, if this acts affects, the global oil chain and other, aspects of the industry?
Well, already, with the bombing of Iran by the United States, or even the exchange of rocket fire between Israel and Iran, political risk index analysis have already been escalated. And so, like I said, you don't have to go very far. Ships that are going to pass through that area will, incur higher insurance premiums. And besides that, other aspects of world economy have already been affected. Yes, it's going to create quite a bit of escalation of cost. It's going to cause inflation around the world because once insurance premiums go up and oil shortages, I mean, will occur because the oils that pass through that strait will be limited, and that would cause costs to escalate and also create inflation around the world.
All right, and what would you say has been the response of, the Arab League and other Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, looking at the possible implications of this war and how it will affect them?
Well, the Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, it's very influential, um, are going to be very cautious, and I think they have been very, very cautious. Honestly speaking, I applaud their disposition or their attitudes or their behaviors during this crisis. What they have sought to do in many instances has been to be intermediaries for negotiations, even with Ukraine and Russia. Saudi Arabia and the other countries, at least Saudi Arabia, I know, and their immediate neighbors, have provided forums for negotiations even between Ukraine and Russia, not to talk about the conflict with the United States. Now, I realize that the United States and these Arab countries have very good relationships. They have investments in the United States, and the United States have investments in their countries. And so they realize the implications of any kind of escalation around the region. So they have been trying to help. And so they are not trying to intervene directly um, in favor of Iran in this matter. It's not that they are not sympathetic. It's not that they are not allies, but they also know that if this matter escalates into outright war, where the enemy is not clearly defined between us and them, the consequences will be disastrous. I mean, this is my own assessment. The consequences will be disastrous militarily, so the human cost is going to be high, and also the material cost is going to be fairly high because assets will be destroyed, and this is what military solutions lead to. You build weapons, you spend money building airplanes and tanks and bullets, which only destroy or be destroyed. They are very cautious. This is again my own assessment. They are trying their best to mitigate any escalation of the crisis.
All right, so now let's look at, Africa and by extension Nigeria as well, because before the ceasefire, we saw the rise of fuel prices, and after the ceasefire, it seemed to come down a bit. So obviously, the war had some impact on us and other, non-aligned African countries. So now, in situations like this, what can African countries do, to cushion the effect of things like this when they come up?
And what can they do? Let me just throw back to an example. I mean, a recent example. I mean, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, um, many African countries do not have adequate food production, and immediately the price of grains increased. And you can even see that some African countries offered to go and negotiate between Russia and Ukraine because it affected grain imports. The Egyptian government, for example, caused them to increase the prices of subsidized bread. I mean, something so fundamental in the diets of many countries. And so, what can African countries do? What African countries need to do, which is not going to be easy to do, is to try to cultivate their own foods and try to increase agricultural production. But that is a long way off. It's a long-term kind of proposition. So, on the short term, what might happen is these countries will borrow more in order to be able to feed their population because prices will escalate. I mean, that is what is going to happen. They have to develop alternative sources of whatever they're not able to get. Now, a global crisis of this kind will affect African countries only to the extent that prices and costs will rise in the Western world. Okay, many of them are, there's an alternative. Okay, it might also lead to changes in alliances because African countries are not politically strong, and so what's going to happen is that they may be compelled to take sides with whichever side is convenient for them economically and politically. That is what I see.
All right, and how do you think this war might redefine alliances, particularly seeing the growing proximity between Iran and powers like China and Russia?
Well, what is going on there is that, of course, you can see the world order is shifting. I mean, China is, using its economic muscle, is essentially trying to restructure global power systems. And so China is becoming very influential in Africa, and even Americans are, somewhat uncomfortable that China is exerting quite a bit of influence in the United States. Remember Donald Trump, the president of America, was threatening to take over Panama because he said the Chinese are exerting a lot of influence there. And so, under the circumstances, now African countries are quite vulnerable. They don't have the capacity to actually easily take sides. But what I think is going to happen is that global power shifts will compel African countries to try to be neutral. In my view, they should try to be neutral, but being neutral can be very, very difficult.
And do you think that there is still hope or room for, third-party mediations, by other of the global power blocks?
I would hope so. I mean, war is very costly. War is, war, causes a colossal waste of resources. And I think that the leaders of the world are not oblivious to the consequences of war for economic disruption. And so I'm hoping that mediation eventually is going to work. My feeling at this point in time is that both Israel and the United States, their major objective is to destroy the nuclear capabilities of a country like Iran. And the major objective is to protect Israel. I mean, the confrontation between Israel and the Arab world is something that I feel should really never be happening because those two communities, those neighbors, they have lived in that area for centuries. The whole idea of trying to totally destroy Israel to me does not make sense. And I would hope that eventually we come to our senses, or they come to their senses on both sides, and understand that destroying each other might just end up destroying the entire region. This is my view.
All right, now, what does this conflict reveal about, the situation, or should I say the weakness of the current global peacekeeping architecture, particularly UN Security Council?
Well, the UN Security Council is it's a political organization, and remember that within the UN Security Council, uh, there are rivalries. They have veto power there. If you talk about the big powers that are in the Security Council that have a vote, that have veto power there, Russia is not particularly in good terms with the West. China is not particularly in good terms with the West. And so when things go to the Security Council, the tendency is for essentially to achieve paralysis. One group would propose something and the other bloc will simply veto it. For example, if you pass a resolution to condemn Israel, the United States will veto it. If you pass a resolution to condemn Iran, the Russians will veto it. The Chinese will not support it. And so I think my feeling all along is that the Security Council is effective in its own limited way, but its effectiveness is limited.
Okay, and if we find a situation where global diplomacy fails, in intervening in this conflict between Iran and Israel, what message do you think it passes on to high-risk countries like the Korean Peninsula, Ukraine, and Taiwan?
Why do you consider them high risk countries? Um, Diplomacy here, I hope, will succeed. Now, what would happen in Ukraine might be that the Western world will, arm Ukraine much more forcefully, and the Koreans. I don't know if you're referring to North Korea or South Korea. North Korea may have nuclear capabilities. Um, well, militarily, unless Russia backs them, they cannot do very much. What do they do? Invade Japan? They're not going to be able to invade Japan, even though I would say nominally Japan does not have a military, but believe you me, if they need to mobilize, the Japanese will not have any difficulty mobilizing. And so I don't see much coming out of it. If anything, you will just see an escalation of war that will be meaningless at the end of the day.
And some people are, of the opinion that this could possibly be the start of, a third world war. Now, do you agree with that?
Well, you cannot totally discount what comes out of it. Yeah, potentially this is what it is because the powers are clearly, I would say, the alliances are very very clear. The Western world, for example, will not condone any invasion of Ukraine. My assessment is this: let us say that Russia effectively conquers Ukraine. They are not going to be there very easily. Believe you me, Ukrainians will rise and engage the Russians in what you might just call a war of attrition. And believe you me, the Russians will eventually have to pull out and allow Ukrainians to govern themselves. The conflicts between Russia and Ukraine have been there for a long time. I mean, if you go through Slavic history. The Russians have, I mean, the Ukrainians have always felt oppressed by the Russians. A lot of things have happened. In the 1930s, for example, there was this compulsion against Ukrainians to supply grain to the Russians, which led to extensive famine and starvation. And that actually about 25% of the Ukrainian population died in the Holodomor, which is just another equivalent of the Holocaust. And so, right now, if, for example, the Iran-Israeli conflict escalates, again, you're going to have a big situation of just devastation in that whole region. So this is again my assessment.
Okay, and also, do you think that economic cooperation can become a foundation of peace building in the Middle East, or would you say that the mistrust has gone too deep for any form of reconciliation?
There can always be reconciliation. There's always room for reconciliation. Economic cooperation, I mean, you are not saying something new. economic cooperation is the best way that they could have resolved their differences. The problem is not economic cooperation. I think common sense would lead both sides to that. The issue, I want to be very honest here, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but if I do, I am sorry. With the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, the Arabs have always felt that Israel should not exist, and therefore um, uh, they want to destroy the State of Israel. But some countries have come to realize that that will not be useful. Egypt has made peace with Israel long ago. I understand recently the Saudi Arabians have been, saying that they would like to find cooperation. But organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas are determined to continue to seek the destruction of Israel. What I would hope is that um, both sides come to reasonable understanding. All the resources that are spent digging tunnels and developing weapons, defensive weapons, will be invested in production. And my feeling is that both sides can be reasonable. There have been propositions for an independent Palestinian state. There is the issue of the Golan Heights and Jewish settlements. And maybe we can negotiate, the both sides can negotiate on those issues and try to live peacefully with each other. Yes, economic cooperation is the best solution. But the ideological attitude that Israel must be destroyed has to go away. I mean, they just have to change that attitude because my feeling is that both sides have been neighbors in that region for thousands of years. I mean, um, if you read history, you see that the Jews and the other Arab neighbors have been neighbors over there. They even claim to be all descendants of Abraham, the Jews and the Arabs. And so my question to them is, what's your problem? Okay. If you ask me, I will audaciously say that these two neighbors have no problem with each other. Their real problem has been the Europeans who have tried to dominate the area throughout the centuries, at least since recorded history, since the end of the Bronze Age, around 1200 BC. The Europeans have been trying to dominate that area. And essentially, what it has given rise to is inciting one side against the other for their own benefit.
All right, now speaking about a change in attitude, do you think that it may be a change in leadership, seeing the involvement of the US and how the conflict escalated over a couple of days? Do you think a change in leadership, could change the direction of the conflict or change the mindset of, the both countries?
A change in whose leadership? A change in Israeli leadership, or a change in US leadership, or a change in the leadership of the Arab world? Already, we at the beginning of this conversation, uh, what changed between Iran and Israel was a change in leadership. Now, are you going to now compel the Iranians to change their, Islamic leadership? If you can force that, well, fine and good with me. Maybe something would happen. But yes, a change in leadership and a change in attitudes, yes, will change everything. This is what happens. As I said at the beginning, it's an ideological thing, and this is why you have the Iran-Israeli conflict, changing from friendship to enemy.
All right, and just before we let you go, what diplomatic innovations or some sort of alternative peace frameworks do you think that the world can adopt to prevent future escalations of conflicts like this?
Wait a minute. Can you take your question again?
All right, I asked what diplomatic innovations or alternative, peace frameworks could the world adopt to prevent future escalations like this one from happening?
Well, I mean, if you ask about what diplomatic framework can be used, the diplomatic framework is there already. There's no doubt about it. Okay, people just have to be reasonable. People just have to cease to be greedy, and this is what it is. To me, it's just plain greed. There's enough to go around. To be honest with you, if you ask me, there's enough to go around, and so. The only innovation that I can see is for people to be less greedy on both sides, and also to disabuse their minds of superficial attitudes. That's what it is. Disabuse their minds of superficial attitudes. The Jews and the Arabs belong in that region. Trying to destroy one or the other is not going to help. But again, like I said, the Western world has been their problem. After all, through the centuries, the Jews were considered enemies of Europeans, and they dispersed them in 132 AD. Now, after the Holocaust of the Second World War, they resettled the Jews back into the Middle East, and now they've become their friends. And the whole thing is simply that in resettling the Jews back in the Middle East, it's part of all Western Europe's attempt to have a foothold in the area. I mean, this could lead to a lengthy philosophical conversation between you and I, because all of a sudden the Jews become the friends of Europeans. But the Jews were not friends of Europeans for how many years? For almost 2,000 years. From 132 AD, when it was Europeans that chased the Jews out of Middle East, and now it was Europeans that brought them back. And all along, the Jews were resilient. They lived in Western Europe. The Europeans didn't want them. They were accused of dominating everything. And so after the Holocaust and the Second World War, which ended in 1945, they brought the Jews back by themselves. And now they are great friends of the Jews. So if you ask me, I mean, I can go into a long philosophical and historical analysis that the Arabs and the Jews should really understand that they are not each other's problem. They are not. No, they should not be.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Chinyere, and where we truly appreciate. He is an economist and currently a tenured full professor of business at Medgar Evers College, Connie. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. All right, and we'll go on a very quick break, and when we return, the show continues.
Maybe in about 5 minutes.
News in your pocket.